So when you think of Helen Keller, what's the first image that comes to mind? For most of us, it's that famous scene of a young girl at a water pump. And yeah, it's an incredible story about overcoming adversity. But that's not the whole story. Not even close. Today, we're going to talk about the Helen Keller you probably never learned about in school.
Let's just jump right in with this quote, shall we? The majority of mankind is ground down by industrial oppression, so a small remnant may live in ease. Wow, that's a pretty fiery critique of wealth and power, right? And it was written by Helen Keller all the way back in 1911. This is our first big clue that there is so much more to her story than just one moment of inspiration.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, probably not. So the big question is, how did the quiet, isolated girl we all know from the history books turn into one of the most radical political thinkers of her day? Well, to really get it, we've got to go back to the very beginning, to her world of silence and darkness.
Before she could challenge the world, she first had to find a way to even understand it. Her earliest years weren't defined by what she had, but by everything she had lost.
You see, she was born a perfectly healthy child, but at just 19 months old, a mysterious illness, we still don't know exactly what it was, plunged her into a world without sight and without sound. By the time she was 7, she was this incredibly bright kid, but she was trapped. She later called it a dense fog. She had little signs to get what she needed, sure, but no real language to connect with anyone or to express the rich, complex world inside her head.
Her family was just desperate for a way to reach her. Their search eventually led them to the Perkins Institute, and that's where they found Anne Sullivan, a young teacher only 20 years old, who was herself visually impaired. This one meeting, well, it was about to change everything. In fact, Helen Keller wouldn't just call the day Anne Sullivan arrived the start of her education. She called it my soul's birthday. I mean, think about that. It was the beginning of her true liberation.
But you know, that famous moment at the pump, it didn't just happen overnight. For weeks, Anne had been patiently spelling words into Helen's hand, but it just wasn't clicking. Helen would just copy the motions, not understanding what they meant. The frustration was building and building, until that one day, at the water pump. As the cool water rushed over one of her hands, Anne spelled out W-A-T-E-R into the other. And suddenly, it all made sense.
In her own words, you can just feel the explosion of that moment. It wasn't just learning a word, it was like her entire consciousness was switched on. The key had finally turned, the door to her mind was unlocked, and once it was open, she sprinted through it and never, ever looked back. And this incredible personal breakthrough? It fueled a whole lifetime of public advocacy. She didn't just learn how to communicate for herself. She used that powerful new voice to speak up for people who couldn't be heard. I mean, her academic achievements alone were just mind-blowing for the time. She went to these prestigious schools, and in 1904, she graduated from Radcliffe, which was basically the women's college for Harvard. Think about that. She became the very first deaf-blind person in history to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. It was completely unprecedented. But graduating college, that wasn't the finish line for her. No, that was just the starting block. She became this huge international celebrity, but she used that fame, that platform, for something so much bigger than just telling her own story. And this is the Helen Keller that history seems to quietly sweep under the rug. She was a co-founder of the ACLU, a proud card-carrying member of the Socialist Party, a wobbly with the industrial workers of the world. She fought for a woman's right to vote, for access to birth control, and for racial justice as a supporter of the NAACP. She was a passionate pacifist who believed war was just a tool for the rich. So how did the world take all this? Well, as long as she was this quiet, inspirational symbol, the press absolutely loved her. But the second she started talking about her socialist beliefs, whoa, the tone changed fast. All of a sudden, critics, like the editor of the Brooklyn Eagle, started suggesting that her disabilities meant she couldn't possibly understand complex things like politics or economics. But Helen's response? Oh, it was just brilliant. Absolutely devastating. She took their insult and turned it right back on them. She basically said, "You're calling me blind and deaf? You're the ones who are socially blind and deaf. You defend a broken system that is the very cause of so much of the physical blindness and deafness we're trying to prevent in the first place." What a comeback.
So what's the real lesson here? What can we learn from her incredible life? Well, it goes way beyond just a story of personal triumph. It's about a completely different way of seeing the world.
This right here gets to the absolute core of her philosophy.
For Helen, a disability wasn't just a medical problem. It was a social justice problem. She was one of the first to argue that a lot of the blindness in the world wasn't just bad luck. It was preventable. It was caused by things like unsafe factories, corporate greed, and poverty that kept people from getting basic health care. She connected all the dots.
And what's really amazing is that she understood her own privilege. She knew her incredible success story was possible because her family could afford to hire Anne Sullivan, because she had supporters like Mark Twain. She knew she was the exception, not the rule. And that's why she fought for a world where everyone had a chance to rise.
So, reclaiming the full story of Helen Keller means we have to see her as more than just an inspiration. We have to see her as a revolutionary, a role model for challenging the very systems that create inequality. Her real legacy isn't just that she learned to speak, it's what she decided to say with that voice. And that kind of leaves us with a big question to chew on. We took Helen Keller's story and we sanitized it, right? We turned a complex, radical thinker into a simple, comfortable fairy tale. And it really makes you wonder, whose full, complicated, and challenging stories are we overlooking right now?